A flight delayed on the tarmac is a test of patience. But for one black teenager, it became a crucible of humiliation. The crew, the very people meant to ensure her safety, turned into her tormentors, all because of her hair. They laughed, they pointed, they whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. With every snicker and cruel joke, a piece of her confidence was chipped away. But they made a critical mistake. They thought she was just a girl. They had no idea who her mother was. And when that mother walked to the front of the cabin with airport security, her voice was quiet, but her command would echo through the entire airline industry. "Shut this plane down." The recycled air of the cabin hummed a monotonous drone that usually lulled passengers into a state of sleepy indifference. For 16-year-old Serafina, however, the hum was a baseline to the thrumming excitement in her own chest. She was on her way to the National Youth Innovators Summit in San Francisco, a finalist for a prestigious award in robotics. It was the culmination of 2 years of relentless work, of late nights, spent soldering circuits and writing code until her fingers ached and her vision blurred. Beside her, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Her mother reviewed a dense technical document on her tablet. Her brow furrowed in concentration. To the casual observer, she was just another well-dressed woman in business class. In reality, she was a titan in the world of aerospace engineering, a senior vice president at a leading technology corporation, and a fact known to very few, a member of the board of directors for the very airline they were currently flying transcontinental airways. Serafina shifted in her plush leather seat, the movement causing her hair to sway gently. It was a work of art, a testament to her heritage and her personal style. Intricate Fulani braids, adorned with a few tastefully chosen silver clasps, were gathered into a high, elegant bun. It was her crown, a symbol of pride she wore with the same confidence she brought to her robotics lab. It had taken her stylist and a good portion of her previous day to create the style, and Serafina loved it. It made her feel bold, regal, and ready to conquer the summit. The first hint of trouble was subtle, easily dismissed as an accident. A flight attendant, a woman named Heather, with a name tag that seemed too cheerful for her pinched expression, brushed past their row. The corner of her heavy service cart clipped the edge of Serafina's headrest, jolting her. "Oops. So sorry," Heather said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at Serafina's hair, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze, before moving on. Evelyn, without looking up from her tablet, simply said, "Be more careful, please." Her tone was mild, but carried an undercurrent of authority that made Heather pause for a fraction of a second before continuing down the aisle. A few minutes later, another flight attendant, a tall, lanky man named Gary, began his own pass. As he reached their row, he made an exaggerated show of squeezing past. "Bit of a tight squeeze here," he announced to no one in particular, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "Gotta watch out for obstructions." He gestured vaguely in Serafina's direction, and a faint smirk played on his lips. Serafina felt a hot prickle of embarrassment. She instinctively tried to make herself smaller in her seat. Was he talking about her? Her hair. She glanced at her mother, but Evelyn's face remained a mask of calm professionalism, her eyes still fixed on her screen. Perhaps Serafina was imagining it. People were often curious about her hair, and sometimes that curiosity came out awkwardly. The plane finally began its slow taxi away from the gate. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a slight delay due to tarmac congestion. An hour, he estimated. A collective groan rippled through the cabin. An hour was an eternity in a confined space. For Serafina, It was the beginning of a nightmare. With the plane stationary, the cabin became a small, stagnant world. Heather and Gary seemed to find numerous reasons to patrol the business-class aisle. Each pass by Serafina's seat felt more pointed than the last. Heather would sigh dramatically as she approached, her eyes rolling towards the ceiling. Gary took to humming the song "Whip My Hair" under his breath whenever he was near. Then came the passenger in the seat behind them, a portly man in a wrinkled suit who Serafina would later learn was named Mr. Abernathy. He flagged down Heather, his voice a whining complaint. "Excuse me, miss, I can't properly see my movie screen. There's this thing in the way." He jabbed a thumb towards Serafina's head. Heather leaned in conspiratorially. "I understand completely, sir," she whispered, though her whisper carried easily to Serafina's ears. "Some people are just so inconsiderate." The word struck Serafina like a slap. Inconsiderate. She had done nothing but sit quietly in her assigned seat. The heat in her cheeks intensified a burning shame that she didn't deserve. She could feel the stares of other passengers. The whispers started little pockets of judgment in the quiet cabin. Evelyn finally put down her tablet. She turned in her seat, her gaze cool and direct, and addressed Heather. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Her voice was still quiet, but the placid surface had been broken. A dangerous current was now visible just beneath. "The gentleman behind you is having trouble seeing his screen," Heather replied, her professional smile firmly in place. "Because of your daughter's hairstyle. My daughter's hairstyle is not in violation of any airline policy," Evelyn stated, her voice flat. "She is sitting comfortably in her seat, and her hair is not extending beyond the boundaries of that seat. The problem, it would seem, is with the gentleman's attitude, and now with yours." Heather's smile faltered. She was unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. She exchanged a quick, nervous glance with Gary, who was hovering nearby. Mr. Abernathy, emboldened by the crew's support, piped up again. "It's a fire hazard, is what it is. All that stuff. What if we have to evacuate? She'll take out half the row trying to get through the door." A few passengers snickered. Gary chimed in. "He has a point. Safety is our primary concern." The absurdity of the claim was breathtaking. A fire hazard. It was a ridiculous, transparently racist jab. Serafina, who had debated the finer points of lithium-ion battery safety in her robotics project, felt a surge of indignation mix with her humiliation. "That is the most ludicrous thing I have ever heard," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "Are you a certified safety inspector, sir?" She directed the question at Mr. Abernathy, who sputtered, taken aback. Then she turned her gaze back to the crew. "And are you as certified flight professionals actually entertaining this nonsense?" The direct, pointed questions seemed to throw Heather and Gary off balance. Their smirks tightened. They were used to being in charge, to holding all the power in this metal tube. They weren't prepared for a passenger who spoke with the precision of a lawyer and the unflappable confidence of a CEO. They didn't know how right they were, but their animosity, now peaked, was about to curdle into something far uglier. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The captain's voice announced another 30-minute delay. The air in the cabin grew thicker, heavier, with unspoken tensions. For Serafina, the space between her seat and the one in front of her felt like a defendant's box. Every pass by the flight attendants was a fresh accusation. Heather approached with the beverage cart, her movements jerky and aggressive. As she reached their row, she made a show of losing her grip on a can of soda water. It tipped, fizzing and splashing onto the carpet, inches from Serafina's feet. A few cold drops hit Serafina's exposed ankle. "Oh, for goodness sake," Heather exclaimed, her voice a pitch too high. "Now look at this mess." She glared pointedly at Serafina's bag tucked under the seat, as if it were somehow responsible. "It was an accident," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of emotion. She handed Serafina a napkin from her own tray table. Her calmness was a strange, unnerving counterpoint to the crew's escalating hostility. It wasn't the placidity of a victim, but the focused stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Gary, emboldened by his colleagues' theatrics, decided to take the harassment to a new level. He walked down the aisle, no cart this time, his hands empty. He stopped right beside Serafina, leaned over as if to speak to the passenger across the aisle, and said in a stage whisper that carried through the entire front cabin, "You know, the FAA really should have regulations about how much hair product you can bring on a plane. All those oils and sprays. It's a wonder the chemical sensors haven't gone off." This time the laughter was louder. A man in the row ahead turned around and stared openly at Serafina's head, a look of contempt on his face. Mr. Abernathy chuckled from behind a wheezing, unpleasant sound. "I told you it's a tinderbox." Serafina's hands clenched into fists in her lap. Tears of rage and shame pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to stand up and scream. Most of all, she wanted to understand why. Why were these strangers being so cruel? It was just her hair. A young man sitting across the aisle, who looked to be a few years older than Serafina, had been watching the exchange with a troubled expression. He had a kind face and was wearing a university sweatshirt. He leaned forward slightly and caught Evelyn's eye. "This is not okay," he mouthed silently, shaking his head. He then spoke up, his voice clear but hesitant. "Excuse me. I think you're making her uncomfortable. Maybe you should just leave her alone." He directed his comment at Gary. Gary spun around, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you, son?" "Her knight in shining armor. Mind your own business." Heather was there in an instant, a hand on the young man's armrest. "Sir, please don't interfere with the crew. We are handling a customer service issue." The young man, whose name was Owen, flushed and sank back into his seat, effectively silenced. The message was clear. Dissent would not be tolerated. The flight attendants owned this space, and they were making the rules. Evelyn gave Owen a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but it was one of solidarity. "I see you. Thank you." But the kindness of a stranger, while welcome, was a flickering candle against a rising tide of malice. The crew had an audience now. They were performing, and Serafina was their unwilling prop. They had tested the waters and found them welcoming. There were no other passengers coming to her defense. There were no other crew members stepping in to moderate. There was only the silent, watchful presence of her mother. To Heather and Gary, Evelyn's stillness was a sign of weakness. They mistook her controlled fury for passive acceptance. They saw a black woman and her daughter who, in their prejudiced minds, knew their place and wouldn't dare cause a real scene. They couldn't have been more wrong. Evelyn turned to Serafina, her voice a low, comforting murmur that was just for her. "Breathe, baby. Just breathe. Look at me. Don't look at them. They are insignificant." Serafina tried to focus on her mother's face, on the deep, steady love in her eyes. But it was hard. The whispers and stares felt like physical blows. The cabin, once a vessel of exciting possibility, had become a cage. and the zookeepers were rattling the bars, eager for a reaction. They were about to get one. Not from the crying teenager, but from the silent mother who was finished observing. The time for quiet calculation was over. The time for action was at hand. The final act of cruelty was not born of subtlety or insinuation. It was a blunt physical violation, a crossing of a line that should never have been approached. The captain's voice came on again, this time with a note of genuine frustration. A minor mechanical issue had been detected, and they would be holding on the tarmac for at least another 45 minutes while a ground crew checked it out. A collective exasperated sigh went through the plane. For Gary, this was an opportunity. He saw Serafina, who had leaned her head against the window, her eyes closed, trying to retreat into herself. He saw her elegant, proud hairstyle, and in his twisted mind, he saw a target for his resentment. He began walking down the aisle, affecting a clumsy, oafish gait. "Long day, folks, long day," he said loudly, swinging his arms. As he drew level with Serafina's seat, he tripped. His body lunged forward, his hand shot out ostensibly to catch his balance on the seat back in front of him. But his hand didn't go to the seat back. Instead, his fingers tangled deliberately in Serafina's intricate braids. He yanked hard. Serafina cried out a sharp yelp of pain and shock. Her head was snapped back against her own seat. Several of the silver clasps were torn from her hair, clattering onto the floor. The carefully constructed bun was pulled, loose strands of her hair ripped from the tight braids. The pain was sharp and searing, but the humiliation was 1,000 times worse. For a moment there was a stunned silence in the cabin. Then Gary broke it. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, braying, ugly sound. "Whoa there, got caught in the undergrowth," he howled. Heather, standing near the galley, joined in her laughter, a high-pitched shriek, and Mr. Abernathy, from the seat behind, let out a booming guffaw. "Told you it was a hazard." This was no longer about whispers or pointed comments. This was assault. The laughter of the crew, a sound that should signify friendliness and welcome, was now a weapon of pure, unadulterated cruelty. Serafina's face crumpled. The tears she had been fighting back now flowed freely, silent streams of anguish, tracing paths down her cheeks. The physical pain in her scalp was nothing compared to the deep, shattering wound to her spirit. She had been targeted, mocked, and now physically violated, all for the public's entertainment. And that's when it happened. Dr. Evelyn Reed, who had remained a statue of stoic calm throughout the escalating ordeal, moved. She didn't shout. She didn't stand up and cause a scene. She simply placed a comforting hand on her daughter's trembling shoulder, leaned in and whispered, "I've got you. It's over now." Then, with a terrifyingly calm deliberation, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Her movements were precise, economical, and filled with a chilling sense of purpose. The laughter from Gary and Heather was just beginning to die down, their ugly amusement still hanging in the air. They watched her smirks still on their faces, expecting perhaps a call to a customer service hotline, a complaint that would go into a file and be forgotten. Evelyn ignored them completely. She ignored the stares of the other passengers. Her entire universe had narrowed to the screen of her phone. She swiped to her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name. It wasn't transcontinental customer service. It wasn't a generic airline number. The contact was labeled simply Franklin. She pressed the call button. As the phone at the other end began to ring, she stood up. Her 5'7" frame seemed to cast a shadow that filled the entire cabin. Her eyes, which had been cool and controlled, now blazed with a salt, righteous fury. She looked directly at Heather and Gary, and for the first time they saw not a passive victim, but something else entirely. They saw power. Real power. And a flicker of fear finally entered their eyes. A voice answered on the other end of the line. "Amor." "Evelyn, is everything all right?" Evelyn Reed turned her back on the flight attendants and began to walk slowly toward the front of the plane. Her voice was low, but it cut through the cabin's hum like a shard of glass. "Franklin, it's Evelyn Reed. I'm on transcontinental flight 782, currently on the tarmac at JFK. We have a problem." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the cabin. "There is a critical safety and security failure on board. The crew is compromised and has assaulted a minor." The smirks on Heather and Gary's faces had completely vanished, replaced by pale, slack-jawed disbelief. Assaulted a minor, compromised. What was she talking about? This was insanity. Evelyn listened for a moment to the voice on the phone, and then she delivered the line that would detonate their careers and send shockwaves through the entire corporation. "No, Franklin," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an absolute, unbreakable authority. "There will be no internal report filed later. You will patch me through to the tower supervisor right now. Then you will contact airport security. Tell them to meet the plane at gate C-34. I want this plane shut down. Now." The name Franklin belonged to Franklin Astor, the chief operating officer of Transcontinental Airways. He was a man who oversaw thousands of flights a day, a man who dealt with engine failures, weather diversions, and union disputes. A call from a board member on her personal cell phone from a plane sitting on the tarmac was an event so far outside the realm of normal operations that it set off immediate alarm bells. When that board member was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman known for her unflappable demeanor and razor-sharp intellect, it was a 5-alarm fire. "Evelyn, what's happened?" Franklin's voice was tight with concern on the other end of the line. "My daughter has been verbally harassed and physically assaulted by 2 members of your flight crew. Heather and Gary." Evelyn stated, her voice a stiletto. "Their behavior has been encouraged by their inaction and validated by at least one other passenger. They have created a hostile, unsafe environment. I am invoking my authority as a board member and as the lead safety signatory on the Phoenix 7 aircraft project." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The very model of aircraft I am currently sitting on. The operational integrity of this flight is compromised." In the cockpit, the pilot, Captain McGregor, a veteran with 25 years of experience, received a call that made his blood run cold. It wasn't from his dispatcher. It was from the JFK control tower, patching through a direct, non-negotiable order from the airline's executive office. The order was unprecedented. "Cease all pre-departure checks. Power down the secondary engine. Return immediately to gate C-34. A corporate security team is en route. Acknowledge." McGregor, utterly bewildered, acknowledged the command. He had no idea what was happening in the cabin behind him, but an order of this magnitude meant only one thing. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. He switched on the intercom, his voice betraying a hint of his own confusion. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. It appears we have to return to the gate due to an unforeseen security issue on board. Please remain in your seats. We'll have you on your way as soon as possible." A wave of groans and confused murmurs swept through the passengers. But in the front cabin, the atmosphere was thick with a new, terrifying reality. Heather and Gary stood frozen near the galley, their faces ashen. The word security had stripped them of their bravado. This was no longer a game. Evelyn ended her call with Franklin and turned. She walked back to her seat, her heels clicking softly on the cabin floor. The sound was like a countdown. She sat down next to Serafina, took her daughter's hand and said, "It's all right now. It's being handled." Serafina looked at her mother, her tear-streaked face a mixture of awe and confusion. She had always known her mother was brilliant and successful, but this was a display of power she had never fathomed. It was like discovering her mother was secretly a superhero. As the plane slowly maneuvered back toward the terminal, a new kind of silence fell over the cabin. The snickering passengers now looked nervous, avoiding eye contact. Mr. Abernathy was sweating profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief. The reality of the situation was dawning on them. Their casual cruelty had consequences. When the jet bridge connected with a soft thud, the cabin door was opened not by Heather, but by a grim-faced gate agent. Standing behind him were not one or two airport police officers, but 4 men in sharp, dark suits. They didn't look like cops. They looked like federal agents. Their eyes were cold professional, and they scanned the cabin with an unnerving intensity. They were the airline's corporate security liaisons, the troubleshooters dispatched only for the most serious incidents. They reported directly to the COO's office. One of the men, the clear leader, stepped onto the plane and spoke to the gate agent who pointed towards the front galley. The man's eyes fell on Heather and Gary, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. He then walked directly to Evelyn's row. "Dr. Reed," he asked, his voice respectful. "I'm David Chen, head of corporate security. Mr. Astor sent us. We have a private lounge ready for you and your daughter." Evelyn nodded. "Thank you, David." She helped a still-shaken Serafina to her feet. As they stood up to leave, the gazes of everyone in the cabin were fixed on them. The whispers now were not of ridicule, but of stunned disbelief. "Who was this woman?" Chen spoke into his wrist microphone. "Escort the 2 flight attendants, Heather. Last name Miller and Gary. Last name Phillips off the aircraft. Confiscate their crew IDs. They are to be detained in separate interview rooms. No communication." 2 of his men moved efficiently towards the galley, their faces impassive. Heather started to protest, her voice cracking. "Detained, but it was just a joke. We didn't do anything. My hair. He pulled my hair," Serafina whispered, finding her voice for the first time. Chen's eyes hardened. He looked at Gary, a flicker of disgust in his expression. "We'll get your full statement in the lounge, miss," he said gently to Serafina. He then looked back at his men. "Add the passenger in 4D as Abernathy to the list. Escort him off as well. He can wait with them." Mr. Abernathy's face went from ruddy to a pasty white. "Me, I didn't do anything. I'm a victim here." My view was obstructed. Chen ignored him completely. As Evelyn and Serafina were led off the plane and into the quiet sanctuary of the jet bridge, the last thing they heard was Gary's panicked, whining voice. "You can't do this. We have a union. The shutdown." It turned out was not just for the plane. It was for their entire world. The private lounge was an oasis of calm. Soft lighting, plush armchairs, and a quiet attendant offering bottled water and warm towels. It was a world away from the toxic environment of the plane. Serafina sat curled in a chair, sipping water, while Evelyn stood by the large window overlooking the tarmac. The Flight 782 sat silently at the gate, a disabled giant. Ground crew were swarming around it, but no passengers were disembarking. The entire flight was now a crime scene. Within minutes, David Chen returned, accompanied by a woman in a severe black suit, who introduced herself as Maria Flores, the airline's vice president of in-flight services. Her face was a mask of controlled panic. An incident requiring the personal intervention of a board member and the grounding of a flight was a career-defining and potentially career-ending event. Dr. Reed, Flores began, her voice tight. On behalf of Transcontinental, I am horrified. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for what you and your daughter have endured. Evelyn turned from the window. Her gaze was like Arctic ice. Save the apologies, Maria. I want to know what you are going to do about it. We have already begun a full high-level investigation, Chen interjected smoothly. The flight crew has been suspended pending termination. Their statements are being taken now. The flight's CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, which also captures audio from the front galley, is being secured. All passengers in the business class cabin will be interviewed before being rebooked. There was a young man, Serafina said, suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. He tried to help. He told them to stop. Chen nodded, consulting his tablet. We have his name. Owen Dempsey. Seat 3C. He was one of the first people to volunteer a statement. His account corroborates everything you've told us, Dr. Reed. Good, Evelyn said. Ensure he is not inconvenienced. Book him on the next available flight and give him an upgrade. His decency should be rewarded. Of course, Flores said quickly. Just then another man entered the lounge. He was older, with silver hair and the weary eyes of a man who spent his life mitigating disasters. Evelyn, he said, his tone grave. I came as soon as I heard. It was Jonathan Price, the airline's chief legal counsel. The fact that the top lawyer for a multi-billion-dollar corporation had personally come to the airport lounge was a testament to the magnitude of the situation. Jonathan, Evelyn acknowledged with a nod. I assume you understand the gravity of this. Fully, Price said. Racism, harassment, assault on a minor crew misconduct. This is a legal and public relations nightmare of the highest order. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. And frankly, Evelyn, the timing couldn't be worse. He lowered his voice, though they were in a private room. As you know, the merger talks with Atlantic Air are at a critical stage. Their board is famously progressive. If a story like this gets out, a story about our crews assaulting a black teenager while other passengers cheer them on, it could scuttle the entire deal. We're talking billions of dollars in jeopardy. This was the twist Evelyn had anticipated. It wasn't just about two rogue flight attendants anymore. Their petty cruelty had threatened the very foundation of the airline's future. The stakes had just skyrocketed. Evelyn looked at Price, then at Flores. Her expression was unyielding. The deal is your problem, Jonathan. My problem is that my daughter, on her way to accept a national honor for her brilliance, was made to feel worthless by people wearing your uniform. She was laughed at, humiliated, and physically assaulted. So you will handle your merger. And you will handle this. And you will do it in a way that ensures nothing like this ever happens again. Meanwhile, in separate, sterile interview rooms, the unraveling was happening in real time. Heather, stripped of her cheerful uniform and authority, was a weeping mess, alternating between blaming Gary and insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Gary, in another room, tried to maintain his bravado, but it crumbled under the relentless, calm questioning of a corporate investigator. It was just cabin banter, he insisted. Lighten up. It's the new woke culture. You can't even joke anymore. His defense sounded pathetic even to his own ears. And in a third room, Mr. Abernathy, the loud-mouthed passenger, was discovering the limits of his entitlement. I am a platinum medallion member. I fly this airline twice a month. You can't treat me like this, he blustered. The investigator slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was Mr. Abernathy's corporate travel profile. You are Arthur Abernathy, a regional sales director for the Sterling Coal Corporation. Is that correct? Yes, and my company spends millions with you, Abernathy said, puffing out his chest. I'm sure they do, the investigator said blandly. And I'm sure they'll be very interested in our full report on this incident, which will detail how their employee participated in the targeted harassment of a minor child. I believe your corporate code of conduct has a fairly strict clause about behavior that brings the company into disrepute, doesn't it? The color drained from Arthur Abernathy's face. The comfortable, privileged world he inhabited, where his status protected him and his cruelty had no cost, was dissolving around him. The karma was just beginning to arrive. The fallout was not a slow drip. It was a deluge, a flash flood of consequences that swept through the lives of those responsible with brutal, unforgiving speed. Transcontinental Airways, staring down the barrel of a public relations apocalypse, and the potential collapse of a multi-billion-dollar merger, acted with the decisiveness of a cornered animal. The first to be swept away were Heather Miller and Gary Phillips. They were sequestered in separate windowless rooms at the airline's corporate offices near the airport. Their union representative, a portly, world-weary man named Sal, entered Gary's room, first dropping a thick file on the metal table between them with a heavy sigh. "Don't bother trying to spin this, Gary," Sal said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen it all, but this is a work of art. A work of art." It was cabin banter. She was being dramatic, Gary blustered, though a tremor of fear was visible in his clenched jaw. Sal opened the file. "Here is the sworn notarized statement from the passenger in 3C, a Mr. Owen Dempsey detailing your unprovoked escalating harassment. Here," he said, pushing another paper forward, "is the CVR transcript from the forward galley microphone. It picked up every word you and Heather whispered. My personal favorite is when you called her hair a Brillo pad with jewelry. Classy." Gary's face went pale. He had thought those comments were private. "But this," Sal continued, his voice dropping, "this is the masterpiece." He turned a tablet around to face Gary. On the screen was a video already viewed 1.7 million times. It was shaky, filmed from a few rows back, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed the moment Gary yanked Serafina's hair. It showed her cry of pain. And then it showed his head thrown back in a braying, triumphant laugh, with Heather's high-pitched shriek joining in. The video was titled "Transcontinental Crew Assaults and Mocks Black Teenager." The top comment with over 50,000 likes read, "He laughed. After hurting a child, he laughed." Gary stared at his own laughing face. The sound was monstrous alien. "They can't use that. That's illegal to film on a plane. Tell it to the court of public opinion," Sal grunted. "Your careers in aviation are over. Transcontinental terminated your employment for cause an hour ago. Gross misconduct. Assault. There isn't a union in the world that can save you from this. My only advice now is to get a good lawyer and change your name." He gave Gary the same speech a few minutes later, to a backdrop of Heather's hysterical sobs and pleas that it wasn't her fault. The second domino. Arthur Abernathy was at home, pouring himself a stiff scotch and trying to convince himself it would all blow over when his personal cell phone rang. The caller ID read Beatrice Davis, his division's senior vice president. "Arthur," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I've just spent my afternoon on a conference call with the CEO of Transcontinental Airways and their chief legal counsel. An unusual experience for me. Can you guess what we talked about? Beatrice, there was an incident, but it's being blown way out of proportion. Abernathy started, his voice slick with the false confidence of a salesman. Was it blown out of proportion when you called a child's hair a fire hazard? Beatrice cut in her voice like ice. Or when you encouraged the crew's behavior? Our company, Arthur, has a $100 million travel account with that airline. More importantly, we have a corporate social responsibility clause in our bylaws, a clause I know you've signed off on every year. It speaks of representing the company with integrity and respect at all times. You have brought this company into severe disrepute. You have made us a footnote in a story about racism and bullying. You, Arthur, have become a liability. Beatrice, I'm a top performer. I've given this company 15 years, he pleaded, the bluster finally cracking, revealing the pathetic desperation beneath. And the company thanks you for your service, she replied, the corporate jargon a final sterile twist of the knife. HR will be in touch tomorrow with the details of your severance package. Do not log into your company email. Your access has been revoked. The line went dead. Arthur Abernathy stood in his expensive living room, the phone still pressed to his ear, a man whose entire identity had just been deleted with a single click. But the most significant battle was being waged in a sterile, high-tech video conference room. On one side of the screen were CEO Marcus Thorne and legal counsel Jonathan Price, their faces grim. On the other was Dr. Evelyn Reed, her expression as unyielding as granite. The Atlantic Air deal is on a knife's edge, Evelyn, Price said, trying to appeal to her as a fellow board member. Their chairman called Marcus personally. He's deeply concerned by the cultural issues this incident has exposed. He should be, Evelyn replied, her voice dangerously quiet. I am too. Your cultural issues allowed 2 of your employees to assault my daughter. So here is what you are going to do. You are not going to contain this. You are going to own it. Your public apology will be released within 3 hours. It will not use weasel words like, "We regret any offense caused." It will state precisely, "We apologize to Serafina Reed for the racist and abusive behavior of our crew." It will confirm the immediate termination of all employees involved. Thorne started to speak. Evelyn, our standard protocol is... Your standard protocol, she interrupted, created this problem. We are using my protocol now. Second, you will announce a complete overhaul of bias and de-escalation training. You will bring in a top-tier consulting firm to design it, and I will have final approval on the curriculum and its implementation. This will not be a one-off webinar. It will be a continuous, certified training program for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the pilots. She paused, letting the scale of her demands sink in. The cost would be astronomical. Finally, she said, her eyes boring into Thorne's through the screen. A simple cash settlement to me would be an insult. It would look like hush money. Instead, the airline will endow a foundation, the Serafina Reed Grant for Young Women of Color in STEM. The initial endowment will be $10 million. Its mission will be to ensure that brilliant young women like my daughter have the resources to change the world. You will turn this disgusting incident into a permanent legacy of opportunity. It's the only way you salvage your brand, and just maybe your merger. It was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Thorne and Price exchanged a quick, panicked look. They had no choice. This wasn't just about saving a deal anymore. It was about saving the entire airline from a woman who had been pushed too far. For Serafina, the experience was surreal. While waiting for her summit to begin, she watched from the hotel room as the story of Flight 782 became the biggest news in the country. She saw the viral video, she read her own name in the headlines. But instead of feeling like a victim, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. The ugly laughter she heard in the video was no longer just a source of her pain. It was now the evidence that had brought her tormentors' worlds crashing down. She saw her mother's strategy unfold, turning their personal humiliation into a national conversation and a force for tangible good. She walked onto the stage at the Innovators Summit the next day, not as the girl who was cried on a plane, but as Serafina Reed. Her hair was rebraided, a crown of defiance and grace. She was no longer just a finalist. She was the story's hero. The karma that had cascaded down upon Heather, Gary, and Arthur had washed the path clean for her own ascent. The aftermath of Flight 782 wasn't just about punishment and public relations. It was about the quiet, profound shifts that redefined futures. While the world watched the dramatic fallout for the perpetrators, the more significant changes were happening away from the spotlight, culminating in a victory that was sweeter than any revenge. Serafina stood backstage at the National Youth Innovators Summit, the low hum of the expectant audience, a tangible presence through the heavy curtain. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of nerves and excitement. 2 days ago, that same frantic beat had been born of fear and humiliation. Now, it felt like the thrumming of a powerful engine warming up. She gently touched one of the silver clasps in her freshly styled Fulani braids. The hairstyle was nearly identical to the one she'd worn on the plane, a deliberate choice. It was not something to be hidden. It was a banner to be flown. When her name was called, she walked onto the brightly lit stage with a poise that belied her 16 years. Her presentation was on a swarm robotic system she had designed inspired by the collaborative behavior of honeybee colonies. She spoke with passion, but as she reached her conclusion, she deviated slightly from her prepared remarks. The logic of swarm robotics, she said, her voice clear and steady, teaches us that the strength of a system isn't in the power of a single unit, but in the seamless, respectful collaboration of all its individual parts. When every unit is allowed to function with dignity, to occupy its space without interference, the entire system thrives and can achieve incredible things. When that harmony is broken by rogue elements, the entire mission is compromised. The judges, a panel of esteemed academics and tech entrepreneurs, exchanged impressed glances. They heard the double meaning, the quiet wisdom forged in a crucible of conflict. The judge who knew Evelyn, a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, smiled subtly. When the time came to announce the grand prize winner, there was no real contest. The announcer called her name, and the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. As Serafina walked to the podium, the applause washing over her, she felt the last vestiges of shame and hurt being cleansed away. She accepted the heavy crystal trophy, her hands steady. "Thank you," she said, looking out at the sea of faces. "I want to thank the judges, my mentors, and my mother, who has taught me everything about strength and integrity. This award is an honor, but the real prize is the opportunity to keep building, to keep innovating, and to help create a future where every voice can contribute and every person can wear their crown with pride." Miles away in a noisy university library, Owen Dempsey was staring at a mountain of debt projections, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. His phone buzzed with an unknown number from a Virginia area code. Annoyed at the distraction, he almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Dempsey," A crisp, professional voice asked. "My name is Patricia, from Dr. Evelyn Reed's office. Dr. Reed asked me to reach out to you personally." Owen's mind went blank. Dr. Reed, the powerful, calm woman from the plane. Yes, is everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful, Mr. Dempsey," the assistant replied, a smile in her voice. "Dr. Reed was exceptionally impressed by your character on the flight to San Francisco. She was also made aware that you are a second-year aerospace engineering student. Her company, Aerodyne Technologies, has a highly competitive summer internship program. Dr. Reed has personally created a position for you, should you want it. It's fully paid, includes a housing stipend, and you would be working directly with the team that designed the guidance system for the new Mars rover." Owen sank into his chair, speechless. The library's ambient noise faded to a dull roar. This wasn't just an internship. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a direct path to his dream career. It was a reward, so disproportionate to his small act of speaking up that it felt like a miracle. His simple decency had altered the entire trajectory of his life. The journey home was the antithesis of their journey out. A sleek, private Gulfstream jet sat waiting for them on the tarmac. The two pilots greeted them by name, their demeanor one of utmost respect. Inside the cabin was a hushed world of cream leather and polished mahogany. A single flight attendant, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, served them sparkling water and warm pastries. As they ascended into a sky painted in brilliant hues of orange and purple Serafina, finally relaxed completely. She watched her mother, who was looking out the window, a serene expression on her face. "The scholarship fund," Serafina said quietly. "That was the real checkmate, wasn't it?" Evelyn turned her eyes soft. "Punishment is temporary, baby. It makes you feel good for a day. But justice. Real justice is about building something permanent out of the wreckage. Every year for the rest of this airline's existence, they will have to write a check that honors you. They will have to give a brilliant young woman of color a chance she might not have had otherwise. Their act of trying to tear you down will now be the reason others are lifted up forever. That's power." Serafina leaned her head back against the soft leather, the jet's engines a comforting murmur. She thought of the journey, the whispers, the laughter, the vicious yank on her hair. She thought of her mother's cold fury, the command to shut the plane down, and the cascade of consequences that followed. It was a story of fire and pain, but it had ended here in this quiet, peaceful ascent. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with a new understanding. "Thank you. Not just for all of this, but for showing me how to be strong." Evelyn reached across the aisle and took her daughter's hand. "You already were strong, Serafina. You were born with a steel spine. I just made sure the world saw it." Looking down from the window, Serafina saw the cities below twinkling like scattered jewels. The world no longer seemed as scary or as random as it had just a few days ago. It was a place with its own set of physics, its own rules of action and reaction, and she for the first time felt like she understood them. Her hair, catching the last rays of the setting sun, seemed to glow. It was her crown, yes, but it was also her armor, and now it was a monument. So what's the takeaway from Serafina's story? It's a powerful reminder that prejudice and cruelty, no matter how casual, can have devastating consequences. The flight attendants and the passenger thought they were just having a laugh at a young girl's expense. They never imagined they were poking a lioness who had the power to bring their entire world crashing down. This story is about more than just epic karma. It's about dignity, resilience, and the incredible power of a mother's love. It shows us that standing up for what's right, whether you're a powerful executive or a quiet student like Owen, can change lives. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice being served. Thank you for watching.